And I think the philosophy of leveraging a pre-built app and then just tailoring it or customizing it to suit your needs, it just appealed to me, right? I said you could save a lot of time.
Change management is not easy. This is the theme that when I'm interviewing CIOs and CDOs, there's shaky tenures in many cases because there's a tech element to it, but there's also people element to it.
You had to have a good team of people come together, know each other, collaborate, communicate. So the basic ingredients have never changed.
Any lessons for other CIOs and CDOs?
We are in a fast-changing world of AI, of data resilience, so many different dimensions that CIOs have to be on top of and help drive this change and adoption within the company. So become a servant leader, not just a CIO.
All right, guys, this is Prat Moge with Prometheum, welcoming you to another episode of the AI Data Fabric Show. I'm super excited today to welcome to the podcast Ajay Sabhlok, who's the CIO and the CDO at the hot and fast-growing company called Rubrik. Ajay, welcome.
Thank you, Prat. Looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. So Ajay's, again, I'm in Boston. Ajay's in the Bay Area. When I was looking at Ajay's background, Ajay, like several things impressed me about you. You had a non-standard journey, I would say. Maybe take us through that a little bit on, where you grew up. What are the few key milestones along the way? I know that you've done stints as a consultant. What impressed me about your background is you actually been hands-on. You kind of built data warehouses in retailers. Many people don't appreciate how hard that is. You've done big major projects in terms of transformation, like with Siebel and large companies. Those are, again, not for the faint of the heart. You've been in companies like VMware for like 7+ years. Now you're at Rubrik, which went public, and you kind of been there going, seeing that company go from hundreds of people to thousands of people. So it's an amazing journey. So take me and take folks through where you started, where you grew up. What are some of the early influences that got you on this journey of excellence?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I guess you're right. I've had a varied journey. Started out with.
Did you realize it after I just put it all there? You're like, oh my god.
Yeah, I know. When you put it, in so many kind of different components, you start to realize that there is a lot of different experiences along the way, which actually shapes you, and it kind of turns you into what I do today. But yes, it started way back. I did my engineering in India. I grew up in Mumbai, so I was actually pretty much
great
born
city.
In
It's a great city.
Great city. It was the only city I knew growing up until I went to an engineering college for 4 years. But I returned back to the city of birth, and I worked there for for my very first job with a Tata company, and I think my very first project overseas started out with a retailer, right, in California, and that itself was my first exposure to sort of building applications ground up, right, and this was the era of not having SaaS applications, or for that matter, even on-prem applications that were built out. You had to sort of take all the components and then build them, with your own hands. And just put it all together, right? Whether it was TCP/IP or like networking, you had to go figure out. It was a lot of different engineering components that had to come together, and it was an interesting journey for me because I used to love coding. I was a coder starting out, and I used to love building device drivers and voice cards and all kinds of combination of hardware and software, and I think that led me to work at Oracle Engineering for some time. But then I started to develop an interest in these pre-built applications, and Siebel was obviously a rising star, and so I decided to actually look at how Siebel was actually being consumed and implemented, right? Which was my first foray into professional services and solution architecture. And that's where I spent over 5.5 years helping a variety of customers, predominantly in the Bay Area.
And what made you go from data to apps versus staying in? Many others would have sort of stayed in. What is it that?
Yeah, I think you could. So like I was building applications ground up, but then this concept of a pre-built app, which even Oracle was starting to do. I mean, it's not like there were multiple vendors, but when I looked at Siebel, it had really started resonating well as a CRM tool that you could just take and customize as opposed to kind of building ground up. And I think the philosophy of leveraging a pre-built app and then just tailoring it or customizing it to suit your needs, it just appealed to me, right? I said you could save a lot of time and energy. But the question is, how successful can you be, tailoring and customizing? And so I think that was my very first experience. And as I sort of went through projects, I saw a lot of different approaches, right? Where people would, complain about quality of implementation. They would complain about user experiences, not kind of meeting the objectives of the outcome. And that's where I started to sort of hone in on, what's the missing ingredient, right? How do you turn these projects into something more successful?
Yeah, time, risk, all of those.
Exactly. So the methodology is, was always there, right? We had a waterfall methodology back in time, which sort of like changed to more agile, in subsequent years. But I think there's nothing wrong with that methodology. It's just that people were probably not applying it in the true sense of, in the spirit of, what the technology was, or the methodology was expecting people to do. And so when I started to apply it, I did see a lot of successful outcomes. And I think the most extreme case being where we saw, massive gap in the Siebel incentive comp product, and we started to build the product out. We actually said, why don't we partner with the customer and then build it out? And, ended up writing some BRDs in partnership with the Siebel, the product team. And lo and behold, we had plugged a lot of gaps in about 4 months. And so learning was that you can apply yourself and really help close the gap. In some cases, the gaps could be big, but I think a discovery had to be, deeper in nature. It had to be done with competent people that really knew what they were looking for. And then I think once you sort of like mapped it all out and you figured out the blueprint, then it was a matter of execution, right? And then execution required a bit of discipline as well, right? You had to have a good team of people come together, know each other, collaborate, communicate. So the basic ingredients have never changed, over time, right? It's like saying that, how do I achieve success? It's with all of these, qualities. You probably don't realize it, when you're going through these journeys, and you're also learning in the process. But today I see it clearly, right? And I see what these ingredients are. And so it just went on, went through a couple of more companies like Mercury Interactive, which is kind of the first company where I actually stepped into IT. So that was the third transformation. It's saying, hey, IT is an interesting area as well, where you don't reinvent the wheel. And so it was the same philosophy of saying, if I could take a pre-built app and customize it, now here's me saying, okay, how do I not reinvent the wheel, but achieve excellence? Like enable automated processes, enable a data-driven approach, but do it with minimal effort. Then do it where, everything. Yeah.
That was a non-obvious step, right? To get into IT.
Sure.
Was there somebody who inspired you, or when you were thinking about it, did you have conversations that you remember?
Yeah, no, I think there was, I was at this company, Mercury Interactive. They were a Siebel customer, and and I guess I was solicited, right, for that because I was already helping them achieve, CRM independence, CRM excellence. And so in the process, we realized that, well, this was a much longer journey. And they were sort of looking out for a leader, right, for running the CRM show in IT. And that's where it was a bunch of conversations that led to saying that perhaps you're the best person to lead, not as a consultant, but really as the CRM leader, right, for Mercury. And that's why I decided to step into that role and then maybe influence all aspects of it, right? So because as a consultant, you only have specific areas that you influence. But as a leader, then I started to influence everything, right? From design, build, production, support. But then you think about that entire area holistically and say, how do I succeed? There's so many different things coming at me. And we need to try and succeed in a very global environment, right? So the whole ecosystem was global for this company. And we had to make sure that we would succeed in all the countries we operated in. So that was a good learning for me.
We all learn from failures, right? Like it's one of the things. But you talk a lot about success, and what really surprises me is the longevity you've shown in a variety of these positions, which are not typical, particularly in a high growth area where the company's growing. You have to reinvent yourself. You have to constantly maybe upskill your teams. Was there any early incident where things didn't work out? There was like a failure, and it was like a thing that you still carry as a chip on the shoulder, or things where you like that there was a lot of learnings. Again, I'm asking you because change management is not easy. This is the theme that when I'm interviewing CIOs and CDOs, and there's shaky tenures in many cases because there's a tech element to it, but there's also people element to it, and you have a lot of authority and responsibility, but don't necessarily have all the resources. So these are like really, really tough roles. So I'm trying to sort of figure out what was the genesis of some of your early learnings that shaped you, and sort of so that you can approach this the right way, which clearly is the way you are approaching it.
Yeah, I think there's when I look back at all the different companies I've been at and different roles that I've progressed through, right? So it's been like a steady progression, right, towards taking on bigger leadership roles and expanding my sphere of influence. And I think it was like every opportunity for me was a stepping stone to figure out, okay, how do I, really learn from this? And you talk about, one or two incidents, but I think I've always experienced challenges, right, along the way. Whether it's a CRM project, like I said, Mercury was mostly very Siebel driven, so it was a CRM project. When I went to Logitech, the very first inclination I had was that, they asked me, you are a Siebel guy, and is that something that you would want to implement? And I said, not at this time. I am actually much more impressed by software as a service, which is the Salesforce technology that has been trending for a couple of years now. And I said, even though I am a CRM person and I come from this on-prem background, I see the power of a very cloud-based multi-tenant architecture, because I had been studying that for a couple of years.
What year was this?
This was actually 2007 is when I joined Logitech.
Got it.
So
okay.
2005 is when I started to really start following what is Salesforce architecture, what is it doing? And the reason I was following that is because Siebel had also kind of invested in a cloud architecture, but it was mostly hosted tenants. It was not multi-tenant. And see, the difference, when you start to understand the power of a SaaS application and how you could re-architect it to be like a one single application that can host all your customers as tenants, then you understand that, yes, it is. You can actually redesign applications to be so much more powerful and so much more nimble and scalable. And all you have to do is rethink, right? Because hosting tenants still required a lot of support and maintenance. And every tenant would have issues, and then you had to go address them individually. But a multi-tenant system was like this one big system, and you could learn from each other. And so even as the hosting company, like Salesforce was learning a lot, because all the customers were using the same app, but customizing and configuring it as per their own needs, which was such an amazing concept to me, right? And so that's where I said, you know what, I'm going to bring Salesforce in, because that's, I think, the way to go. It's a much easier way to enable CRM processes very quickly and derive a lot of benefit, right? And I think I was right. Logitech, we accelerated our entire CRM journey, achieved something in 2-3 months where my typical Siebel projects were running much longer. And I had to do it with very few resources because everything was in the cloud. I didn't need to acquire database administrators. I didn't need to tune applications. Complete change, day and night for me. And so that journey continued. And I realized that you had to start looking at newer, it's almost like the newer thinking, right? So whether it was platform, integration platform as a service, or all these technologies started to come out, especially when I went through my 8.5 years at VMware. Every year was a new challenge, right? So my very first challenge, I come into VMware and they said, well, we want to roll out a new customer support system. We are on Siebel. And they said, we are thinking of Salesforce. And I said, well, great idea. But we also knew Salesforce had not enabled an enterprise customer of the size of VMware to ever go up on Service Cloud as we know it now. So how would you succeed in a project like that? And so it was a lot of, for me, it's like saying, how do I become proactive, right? I want to succeed, which means I need to do my due diligence and discovery as deeply as possible. And once we did that, we realized there were a lot of gaps in that product that out of the box would not allow VMware to succeed. So I spent a lot of time with their product team. We figured out how to enable disaster recovery on Salesforce. We said, without that, we just can't go live, guys. Because if you conk out, our customers are impacted. So you have to have high availability, resilience. So we figured out an architecture that would work for us. I even figured out that their portal, customer portal, was not, very mature at that time. And so I said, I think I'm going to build my own portal. So give me an exception license to be able to leverage you as the backend. And I think all these decisions, by the way, were made as part of my due diligence, right? And so it led to then an implementation which was very successful. I still remember our customer support engineers really had some amazing feedback to share. It was very positive. They were very happy with it. And I was like, wow, that's really called success. That I see adoption and I see immediate adoption and I see feedback, which is positive. Yes, there are, a few kinks here and there to iron out, but that's not the problem. We'll get there. But the 90%, the sentiment was so positive. They were like, oh my God, this performance is amazing. Oh, and that was the other thing. We actually performance tested Salesforce and they said, nobody performance tests a SaaS system. And I said, but give us an exception. This is the first time you're going to ever support a company of this size of VMware. So please indulge me. Let's do this together. So reluctantly, they allowed us to do a complete performance test where we scaled it up to thousands of users and all that. And we showed, in fact, we actually hit a few kinks, performance kinks, but it was not because of their platform. It was because of the telecom providers in different regions of the world.
Didn't give you enough capacity.
I remediate those too, right? And so I'm saying this is called comprehensive thinking, right?
Yeah.
And you can apply it to any initiative in life. So it's like if you're building new software, you're going through projects, apply comprehensive thinking, right? Look at all the ways you can fail and then see if you've accounted for it.
Yeah, one of your, as I was talking to you before this, one of the things that I kind of took away is that you seem to approach things as an architect. You sort of lead with architecture.
Yes.
And I've seen this theme with quite a few leaders that they sort of imagine the future and they imagine where you want the to-be state. And what they're sort of thinking through is like, what is this architecture? How is this architecture going to scale? Will it scale? Will it not scale? And they start thinking about it that way. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I found that to be really, I didn't mean to do thumbs down, by the way. So,
Yeah. No, but I think you're absolutely right. So leading with architecture is a core principle that I started to adopt even when I was at VMware, right? We said, because at VMware, we tried architecture in a couple of different ways. And I realized that we hadn't embedded architecture as the bedrock of what we do. It was more like complementing. And I think I did not see the benefit of engaging architecture as a complementary service. I said, no, I think this is a fundamental disconnect with what we're trying to do. Because architects also were not very effective, right? Sometimes
Right.
we even called out the fact that architecture was not being applied very well. And I think the reason for that is because it was not the underpinning for everything we did. And that's where I changed everything at Rubrik. Because I had a blank slate to start with. I said, let's embed architecture into everything we do and think and then see how the pieces of the puzzle fit together before we just decide to roll anything out. Right? And so question everything. Question the tools, question the process, question the data exchange, even resilience, right? I mean, I think we are all about, so Rubrik's all about achieving cyber resilience, right? And it's like this one aspect that we also started to think a lot about. In my previous journeys, I always thought about high availability and disaster recovery, right? But then I started to think about resilience, saying, how do I become a resilient IT, right? Across the board. And fortunately, I think we had our own product to start learning from, because it's always a learning. It's like saying, where do I learn from? So I started to sort of like say, okay, let's adopt and see how do we achieve that part of the puzzle, right? Where cyber attacks are on the rise. And we need to make sure that our data stays resilient. And then, as we progress through the journey, then it became cyber. It's become like multi-cloud architectures. Data is like everywhere. And so I think the landscape is getting more and more complex, right? As you can imagine. And so now for us to succeed, there's so many more dimensions to worry about. It's no longer like, oh, let's get a good app, a good set of apps. It's like saying, let's worry about all these dimensions.
Yeah, it's sort of like the attacks themselves are agentic now. So you have to sort of start to think about, as an agent, how would you basically detect, remediate, stay ahead? It's a fascinating world. Can you talk a little bit about teams, Ajay? Like when you came to Rubrik, starting out to where you are now, how have you set up the teams? How have they scaled? Now you're at scale. I mean, I'm sort of thinking about this as, with a large team. Any lessons for other CIOs and CDOs on what works, what doesn't work?
Sure. And I think it's always in the context of where you are as a company, right? And so I think my learning at Rubrik, where we were a smaller startup when I joined.
Rubrik was what, 200 million Series D?
Yeah, about that. I mean, it was that small. I think we had about 700 employees back then. When me and my boss from VMware, we came here. I think it was the start of IT at Rubrik. And so we were the early contributors to how we would architect IT, ground up. And so previously it was a shared function between all the business groups. And going from, the early construct of what IT should look like to kind of at scale, I think it was a bit of a journey, right? And there are a lot of learnings along the way. And I think one of the things I had early thoughts about was that apply all your learnings from the past, because now that you get a blank slate, how do you take the best advantage of that? Because you don't have a whole lot of baggage. There is some baggage. I mean, there was a rationalization exercise that we had to conduct because a lot of things were sort of like bought one off, right? There was really no architecture thinking or no...
Owners were probably all over the place.
Yeah. Everybody was like just solving a point problem with a point solution. And we had to convert that into, IT. And so we had to construct the pillars of IT. And I started out leading the, applications area, right? So I said, when I came from VMware, I became the VP of apps. And that itself was, my challenge was, how do I lay the architecture? So again, lead with architecture, look at all the apps, figure out which ones need to be retired because they are not honestly adding value. Some of them were shelved because, people bought applications that really did not get implemented or adopted. And so we went through that whole exercise, cleaned it all up. identified our tier one applications, figured out what we really wanted to do in terms of, data consistency, so integrations across applications, etc. Cloud first architecture. So also declared that we are, even like 7 years ago, we had the luxury of saying that we would be a cloud only architecture, no on-prem applications. And I mean, if you think about cloud only, you could even take an app and run it in one of the public clouds, and that was okay too, but not kind of in your own data center, right? So we did have a data center, and we do manage one today, but it's predominantly for building the Rubrik product and testing it, right, for all the workloads that we support. So that, I think, philosophy helped out because we were able to accelerate a lot of things, right? And then to become data-driven, we also adopted Snowflake early on because they were sort of like the trending vendor, again, a SaaS data warehouse, which appealed to me a lot because my VMware experience was a lot more difficult, right, with a different tool set. And so I said, this is a much more nimble way of adopting. And so I think that was the decision, right, saying, okay, let's bring Snowflake in. And I think it was a rapid enablement journey to become data-driven.
You're starting from your early days. I remember you started with Informix, right?
Informix, and I think, so when I was working for a retailer, which was the very first job in the US, we had implemented a data warehouse, right? So the principles had not changed a whole lot, but of course, things definitely had improved a whole lot.
That's right. Like scaling and the turnkey nature of it.
But it was such a great experience, like saying, something in the cloud can scale so easily. You can, expand your data set. You don't have to worry about performance or storage or capacity. All those are given. It's so elastic. All you have to do is worry about outcomes, right? So data-driven, certified KPIs, etc. And then real time. It's like saying, or near real time, right? So I think that consume KPIs near real time. So you make very good decisions based on current data, not some stale slideware and all that, right? So we encouraged all our execs, and our CEO was very supportive. I think he was such a big adopter of that whole thing that I think
it easier.
Absolutely made it easier because then everyone adopted it very quickly. Yeah. So that definitely is a recommendation that top down, please, get support from your C-suite because they can, honestly, if they adopt and they understand the power of some of these things that we do, the whole company will get behind them.
How much time do you spend chatting with that C-suite or talking to them? If you have imagine the funding is tight, you have this great idea, you're trying to sell it to them. How do you do it?
So I do talk to them every quarter. So I have leadership connects with all my leaders every quarter.
I'm guessing you report to the CFO. That helps. But
I report to the CFO, so he and I are always in sync. But also I put this was a VMware concept that I brought to, which is that if you want to make IT investments, or any software investments in a company, so the question is who makes that decision, right? And I think one of the things I did early on is I said, all tools that are enterprise, not engineering, maybe not InfoSec, or just that decision should be with me, right? But the fact of the matter is that I do need some guidance and I support from C-suite. And so we put together this project review board, which, is basically our CFO or, head of sales, CRO. Our head of engineering is in there and our co-founder. And we also have our chief customer officer now in there, right? So this is our current board. And all IT projects and initiatives with the requirement for new tools get reviewed with them. And we do it once a quarter. We do it annually, but then we do it once a quarter. And we always talk about ROI, about why are we investing in this tool? How is it going to help Rubrik? Is this the right area to invest in? And it's a good discussion because I think when all of us are on the same page, and then I go invest a tool and buy the tool, and I make sure that we get that outcome, everyone's happy, right? Yeah. Plus, we don't see any rogue behavior. I think I used to struggle with that, right? Where people at different business levels would just go buy their own tools and then say, oh, I have my budget, I'll just go buy. And I said, no, the budget belongs to me. Now, in Rubrik, it's all centralized. And I think that helps us at least rationalize something, because we have to worry about, we are a security company, we worry about that. It's a very important dimension. When we do our due diligence and vetting, we say, is this tool going to be secure? We assume breach on these vendors, saying, what's our breach potential for this vendor? Because accordingly, I have to worry about,
protection.
How yes. So all those things get reviewed, the budget gets approved, the PRB weighs in, and sometimes we push back on things which we don't deem are important, right? A good example is like territory management. So for the longest time, I think we drove it in spreadsheets. And I know the sales team had a desire to do it like 3 years ago, like implement, but the CRO said, no, I think we're not ready for this yet, but I'll let you know when I feel we are at scale and ready for it. And recently at the start of this year, he approved it. And he said, we are at scale, we are public, we are growing, time to put it in and get to the next level with how we do territory planning and management and all that. So we are sort of like in the midst of implementing.
Throes of it. Awesome.
Yeah.
Quick parting, I'm just watching the time, and quick parting words of advice for other aspiring CIOs, CDOs.
Yeah, so I think, we are in a fast-changing world of AI, of, data resilience, so many different dimensions that CIOs have to be on top of and help drive, this change and adoption within the company. So I say stay engaged, get involved, work with your teams, inspire them, motivate them. Definitely, get a good, strong team of people that are very passionate about this journey together. I think that's important. And also, for me, it's servant leadership, right? I always say, become a servant leader, not just a CIO, and start helping your teams out, because I think a lot of talent gets locked into your own teams, but you can help unlock it, right? Just by being available, by being engaged, providing responses, and having conversations. And so I think you will basically unlock the true potential of what IT is, and then the company will truly benefit. And we've seen that story play out here.
It's awesome. When you look at other CIOs or CDOs, is there somebody you look up to sort of as a mentor? Who would that be and why?
I think there's a number of CIOs. I mean, the very first CIO at Rubrik, like Avon Puri, right? He's now the chief data digital officer at Sequoia. I think definitely learned a few things. When he was here for a year and a half, the way we shape things, we keep in touch. Lots of good conversations between him and I, and he has a different level of influence now, being part of Sequoia and spinning up so many different technologies. So definitely look up to him. There were a number of there was a CIO at VMware, Mark Egan, and I still respect him because he helped shape us in our early years at VMware. So he was there for 4 years while I started my VMware journey. And I definitely used to look up to him. And there was another leader at VMware called Bill Heil. He was not the CIO, but he was very influential. And I think he also shaped us into what we are today, right? So these leaders were very influential. They had a very different approach to enabling things. And I still respect what I learned from them to this date, right? And in fact, I sometimes fall back on those learnings, and they really help Rubrik as well today. So
that's awesome. Ajay, it was great talking to you. Really appreciate the words of wisdom, and looking forward to collaborating as we go forward. But I really appreciate your time and that you're sort of sharing your perspective, and all the best for Rubrik to scale significantly from where you guys are. We are big fans.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Take care, Ajay.